Hi, everybody. I'm Carrie Sparling. I am the editorial director for CWD, and I am very happy to be joining everybody on this lovely Sunday afternoon for a Screenside Chat with CWD featuring Howard Look. And you can see Howard in the other screen right over there, but I'm not sure how to point to him. I believe he's over here, but if it looks weird,
You're over there
like
for me.
this.
Okay.
So Howard, very awkwardly, I'm going to read a bio as though you don't know who you are, just so I can help inform the people who are watching who you are if they're not aware. So Howard
Okie
Look,
dokie.
who's sitting right over there, is the founder, president, and CEO of Tidepool, which is an open source, not-for-profit effort to make diabetes data more accessible, actionable, and meaningful by liberating data from diabetes devices, supporting researchers, and providing great free software to the diabetes community. Tidepool is also developing Tidepool Loop, which is a hybrid closed loop system for iPhone, and Howard's daughter was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 11. We'll pretend I had that memorized, but it was in fact written down. So Howard, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. It's always great to see you, and I just love children with diabetes. It's made such a huge impact in our family's lives, so it's great to be here.
Excellent. And I am not sure if my family's gonna end up walking in behind us, but my husband and my daughter wear their Tidepool shirts now that we've been in quarantine forever,
Nice.
almost every single day. We do a lot of laundry here, and it's either the blue one or the green one, and they look like they work for you at this point. So
Oh, that's awesome. Well,
yeah.
if anybody's thinking, well, how do I get me one of those Tidepool shirts? It's actually a donor gift that we give out. So you can
Oh,
go to
nice.
tidepool.org/gifts, I believe, and
Excellent.
make a donation and get a shirt.
Well, I'll tell Chris, so he'll
Hey.
take care of that. So, and I know I gave a brief introduction about who you were, but it was like kind of the very written and read out loud sort of one. So, do you want to introduce yourself to the community in a more casual sort of way?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the opportunity to do that. So, hi, I'm Howard, and my daughter Katie, there's her picture right there. That's her high school graduation picture. She was diagnosed with type 1 back in 2011. So, I would say first and foremost, I'm a husband and I'm a dad of 3 kids, Ethan, Brian, and Katie, and my wife Melissa, which you probably can't see, and there's a picture just before we got married. And uh, I also have founded Tidepool back in 2013. And I would say the short form of the story is after Kitty was diagnosed, I was really frustrated with the state of technology. She very quickly got put on a pump and a CGM at the time. At first, it was the Medtronic pump and a Medtronic CGM, and that didn't really work out so well for her. So we switched to the Dexcom G4 at the time. And very quickly, I was like, wait a minute, data is clearly important, but CareLink for her pump doesn't work on my Mac, and Dexcom Studio for her Dexcom doesn't work on my Mac. What am I going to do? And I won't call it hacking, like compared to what other people in the DIY community did. What I did was slightly technical nudging is probably a better word, but I made it so that we could see her Dexcom data and her Medtronic data in one place. And I was like, why isn't anybody doing anything about this? And so started asking around, and as a geek dad, I tried to find other people who were thinking like I was, and make a long story short, ended up founding Tidepool because of all that.
I love that. There's so many people in the diabetes space in particular that are driven by their family's needs or their personal needs, and I
Yeah,
just love how intimate and friendly our community is in that way. It says a lot about us as a group, and also it really helps in times of pandemics where we really need one another because there's a really tight common thread between every single one of us. And so you kind of gave a little bit of it, but in a nod to Chris Snyder, who I know works for you and is way into superheroes, like everyone in my family, Tidepool does have that sort of origin story. And I know a lot of when I first started to hear about the We Are Not Waiting and all that sort of thing was back to the diabetes mind data. Was it the diabetes data? What is the name of the summit that they do?
yeah, Amy
The D
Tendrich's
data?
conference, the fall 2013 Diabetes Mind D Data Exchange. It was the very
Ooh.
first one, and that was kind of where we had our coming out party, where we said, "Hi world, this is what we're up to."
And so that would that be like your superhero origin story
Yeah, well,
from
I mean, we started, so that was fall of 2013.
Mhm.
Prior to Tidepool, I had been working at Amazon at the consumer electronics subsidiary, and I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to do and meeting people, and I met all kinds of people during that time, including Brandon Arbeiter, who I convinced to move out to California and help start Tidepool with me, and a bunch of other people who just felt like, yeah, why can't we do this? Why can't we have an open source organization? You know, at the time, I was actually working on a project based on Android, which is this big giant open source project that enables all kinds of things. And I remember thinking, why isn't there the equivalent for the diabetes community? Why isn't someone building this universal software stack that enables us to get access to this data? And so I started finding lots of people who felt just like I did. Steve McCann was another geek dad who also had a teenage daughter with type 1, and he had also been doing some hacking. And I eventually came to the conclusion that it could be done, that there were enough people who felt strongly about it, that there were enough people who wanted to do something about it, that we could actually make a company out of it. And the notable parts of that origin story are the crazy decisions we made. One was to be a nonprofit. Like at the time I was living in Palo Alto, you know, when you live in Palo Alto and you do startups, you go to VCs, you start at the top of Sand Hill Road and you make your pitch and you get funded. But what was becoming clear at the time was that the diabetes device companies felt like they owned the data that was in the devices, which today just seems like totally ludicrous. But back then, and which wasn't that long ago, like you could, those big long privacy policies that nobody reads, some of them actually said things like, by uploading your data, you give up all right, title, and interest to the data. And so it was very clear that we were going to have to take a different approach in order to liberate the data out of the devices and make it available to people. So, and I have to give total credit to Brian Roberts. He's a board member. He's also a VC at Venrock, which is one of the big, old, revered venture capital firms. Also happens to have a son with type 1, so I got introduced to him. And he said, look, if the device companies think they own the data and you go in there as a for-profit and try to tell them that there's value in the data, they're going to go, yep, we totally agree, and they're just going to keep it trapped in their proprietary silo and not give it up. So I think you want to be a nonprofit. And so the moral of that story is, when, you know, one of the leading healthcare VCs in Silicon Valley tells you to form as a nonprofit, you form as a nonprofit. And he was totally right. So that was, to me, the spark of what we did. Like, let's do this as open source, let's do this as nonprofit, let's rally the community, and let's take a very strong principled stance about data ownership.
And not only have you done that, but one of the hallmarks of your company is also that you guys are entirely virtual, which at one point seemed like, wow, that's such a cool thing to do. But during this pandemic, that seems like an essential thing to do. And so you guys have already nailed the concept of working from home before it became the thing that we were forced to do due to COVID-19. So what has it been like to kind of manage always a virtual team? And how do you see it playing to your advantage in particular now?
So we weren't always completely 100% virtual. We actually had an office in San Francisco for a while, south of Market, where all the other cool cat startups were, actually in a building that was a startup incubator building. And it was a lot of fun. So I would usually go up 2 or 3 days a week and take the train, and we'd all sit together in the office. And we realized that that was just not a good use of our time. And it turned out that it got harder and harder for people to live in San Francisco and live in the Bay Area, and kind of one by one, all our employees moved away. And then one day, Brandon and I were just sitting there and we're like, what are we doing? Like, why just you and me in an office? That makes no sense. And so we gave up the office, I want to say in 2017 full time. So we had been working remote 2 or 3 days a week for those of us that were in San Francisco. Everybody else in the company was fully remote, so we had kind of figured out the hybrid approach. But then we went all in fully remote in 2017. I will tell you though, when the pandemic hit, so we blogged about this, we told the world, here's how we make remote working work. Even with us doing it full time, we weren't prepared. Like having the stress and anxiety of a pandemic going on around you when you're working from home is a totally different ballgame. Like, we weren't nearly as productive as we were before. It is really hard, and we just have to acknowledge that it's really hard, and we have to give people the space to take care of their physical health and their mental health. So we had all the logistics part of it pretty well dialed in, like how to do meetings, how to do an all hands, how to share documents with each other, how to do scheduling, how to keep track of tasks. That was all figured out, but doing all that in the middle of a pandemic, we hadn't figured that
Right.
out either.
And I feel like everyone is still trying to figure that out. And I love when people especially mention uh, homeschooling. It's not homeschooling, it's crisis schooling. I am not a
Oh yeah,
teacher. I am trying to figure out how to step in and be the conduit for school for my kids. So yeah, it's like, I'm really glad that you said that, because people who aren't acknowledging that we are continuing to exist and do this stuff during a pandemic, that
right.
also goes for diabetes. You're not just at home managing diabetes, you're managing diabetes during a pandemic. That is a whole new
Yeah,
party.
exactly. And several of the moms on our team, and I think this was part of the webinar that you took part in,
Mhm.
have shared their best practices for, how to be a mom when you've got little kids during a
Yeah.
pandemic. But it has definitely been a new experience, even though we had already been doing remote working from home. When you've got, especially folks that have little kids at home, we've gotten very used to having meetings, and I love this, where someone will have a kid sitting on their lap and we all wave
Mhm.
at the kid and we'll actually stop and say hello. But it is a totally different experience now.
Yeah, I've also noticed that I'm starting to see different parts of people's homes. So it used to be their home office or the background I was used to, but now I'm seeing like the back of their closet where they hide behind their shoes to have a few minutes of privacy to take their
I
really
had to,
professional meetings.
when our 20-year-olds got sent home from college, I gave up what was my dedicated office, and now I'm in the bedroom. So right there with you.
You're working during a pandemic, so that's
Yep.
keeping it very flexible. And so kind of shifting gears a little bit towards Tidepool specifically and what you guys
Mhm.
provide. So for your data uploading service, can you tell us a little bit about what Tidepool specifically can do for people who are looking at that sea of data and saying, now what?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, the software that we provide today is free. It's available to everyone, and that's really important to us. And I have to give a shout out to JDRF in particular. They funded us with a grant called No Clinic Left Behind, and that basically made it possible for us to make our software available for free forever. So Tidepool for web lets you see all your data in one place, your CGM, your blood glucose meter, your insulin pump. Tidepool Uploader runs on your Mac or PC, and that lets you upload your pump or your CGM or your blood glucose meter to the web. We also have Tidepool Mobile, which makes it so that if you have data on your device, like from a Dexcom, that can get uploaded automatically as well. So what's cool about all that is it's a unified interface. So you don't have to look at one type of display for your insulin pump, a different kind of display for your continuous glucose monitor, and a different type of display for your blood glucose meter. The analogy I always love to use is, do you remember when digital cameras first came out? Like lots of people only know their phone as a camera. Before that, we had digital cameras, and you had to use
Mhm.
the crappy software that came with the camera
Yes,
in order to get the pictures out.
and
So
the uploading cable.
you're right, and you had to use the uploading cable. So that's basically how diabetes devices were. At least with cameras, they all used JPEG as a file format.
Mhm.
So when you sent a picture to grandma, you didn't have to say, hey, grandma, that's a Kodak picture. You have to use the Kodak image viewer, or that's a Canon picture. You have to use the Canon image viewer. They were all JPEG. With
Mhm.
diabetes devices, you had to both use the software that came with the device and use the software to view the data, which was just
Right.
like crazy. We would never stand for that. So that was the problem we solved. So for folks at home, what it means is that now you can see your insulin pump data and your CGM data or your blood glucose meter data all in one place. So just on its own, that's kind of cool, because a lot of people tend not to see their data until the quarterly visit with the endo. And we just make it way easier to get your data out and see your data. During the pandemic, it turns out there was this whole other challenge, which we always knew that telemedicine was important, but the reality is a lot of people didn't have telemedicine visits because you didn't
Mhm.
need to. You could just go into the office, upload your data. Now all of a sudden a pandemic hits, you can't actually go into the office. The doctor wants to see your data. What are you going to do?
Right.
You were very fortunate to already be there, be ready with this great free software that people could say, hey doc, here's my data. You just type their email address and they can create an account and see your data. So we saw a huge explosion in use of Tidepool for telemedicine. We put out a bunch of resources. We added as many users in February, March, April as we did in all of 2019.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
And so in terms of the ease of use, because that was another question that I had
Mhm.
about, telemedicine and the resources that you guys have. So telemedicine, you guys were able to get, your software is able to get data to clinicians a lot more easily, and it lets people with diabetes view their data much more easily. But the mechanics of sometimes getting a clinician's office to opt into things that they're unfamiliar with, like how can patients get their offices, their clinician offices, their doctors to want to be involved with something that they hadn't seen before? How do you get them, on board with Tidepool?
Yeah, it's a super question. We've seen all different strategies for this. One is you can just create your Tidepool account at home, and then you click the share button and you type the email address for your clinician, and they end up getting an invite saying, hey, Carrie Sparling is inviting you to view their data. If the clinician gets enough of those, they're going to go, whoa, I better look into this. Now, the reality right now is clinicians are looking for ways to do this. So it's also going in the other direction. There are clinicians setting up clinic accounts and then sending an invite to their patients saying, hey, I really want to see your data and I really want you to upload. So it can go either way. We've seen the barriers come down dramatically during the pandemic, because if you can't see someone in person and you still need a way to see their data, we've provided an easy way to do it.
And I love that. And my endo actually has type 1, and he and I do not communicate through Tidepool yet because we've had so many different in-person visits, but we will be. So that's
Cool.
part of our next telemedicine visit. And so in addition to the data uploading, you guys have, and this is a huge thing, Tidepool Loop. Everybody's talking about it, and we actually have some questions that are already coming in from the community live on the chat about Tidepool Loop. And for those of you viewing at home, please ask your questions. Feel free to pop them right in the question box, and we'll ask them as breaks come through. But just as a kind of a primer on what Tidepool Loop is, can you walk us through that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tidepool Loop is not yet available, but will be. And it is a closed loop automated insulin delivery system for iPhone. It is intended to connect to interoperable continuous glucose monitors and insulin pumps over Bluetooth. And what it will do is it will automate insulin delivery by reading values from the CGM, running an algorithm, and then deciding based on your personal settings how much insulin you need in that moment every 5 minutes. So Tidepool Loop is under development, as I said, not yet available, but it is based on a do-it-yourself project, an open source project called Loop, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. So this is where I have to give a huge shout out to the DIY community and the We Are Not Waiting movement. We could not be working on Tidepool Loop without the DIY community before us. So I think a lot of people know DIY Loop. I usually call them Tidepool Loop and DIY Loop just to be precise about the distinction. DIY Loop is an open source, do-it-yourself, build-it-yourself project. It's not a Tidepool project. We happen to know many of the people involved deeply with the project, and some of them even work at Tidepool, but the DIY Loop project is a separate initiative that is community supported. Currently, there are about 8,000 people using DIY Loop. That's based on how many people have ordered the Riley Link, the little Bluetooth radio transmitter. So Tidepool Loop is based on DIY Loop. It will be largely the same functionality, but there will be some differences to it. And we are currently actively working on it. We are getting very close to our 510K submission, which is the basically submitting the paperwork to the FDA that says, we think we're ready, here's all the data, can you please give it clearance so that we can market it to the world.
And your shirt, I mean, I should have mentioned at the outside of this question, your shirt basically sets up. So can you just, for those people who aren't as familiar with what the green loop is, could you just kind of quickly describe that?
Yeah, so this is the logo for DIY Loop. It's also the icon that shows up on the screen when DIY Loop is successfully looping, when it's able to talk to your pump, able to talk to your CGM, and when the algorithm is successfully running every 5 minutes, you see this green loop. This is the Tidepool logo, and so I think Paul Forgione on our team came up with the emoticon version of this, which is when you take DIY Loop and then you layer on what we're doing as Tidepool, submitting it to the agency, gathering data from a clinical study, and then ultimately delivering it to the world in the App Store, you get love.
I love that. That is very direct. And so, Howard, we have a number of questions in the
Yeah,
chat
let's
that are
do it.
running through on loop. Can I just kind of jump right into them?
Hmm.
All right. So in no particular order, but the first one we have is from Peter, and he said, "Hi, and thanks for holding the webinar. And also, will Tidepool Loop allow custom targets of 80 or 90?"
That is the plan. So let me say one of the things that I love about how we operate as a nonprofit is we are radically transparent. So you can actually go to tidepool.org/documents and you can see every bit of documentation that we have submitted to the agency. On that topic in particular, you can see, I think it was June of 2019, the documentation that we submitted where we said, here's what we intend to do. Specifically, when it comes to targets, we do intend to file proposing that we do allow customizable target ranges, including down to as potentially as low as 80, maybe even lower. And we think that the data from the JABE Loop observational study will support that. We have to deliver that data to the FDA and they have to agree with us that the data shows that that is safe. So can't promise it yet, but that is our intent. And if you go look at the documentation that we filed with the agency, you can see how that conversation went, and it went well.
I love the full transparency that you guys use. You are um, a good standard to hold other organizations against in terms of
Thanks.
you guys just keeping everything very, very out
Mhm.
there. Someone has asked, Sandra has asked, do you need any testers?
For Tidepool, so I'm going to make a distinction between our current suite of products, Tidepool for Web, Tidepool Uploader, Tidepool Mobile. We do run beta programs for that software. You can sign up at tidepool.org and get on our mailing list. You can also just use our software today, and that is available. And please give it a try and let us know what you think. For Tidepool Loop, so the predominant data that is going to be submitted with our 510K came out of the DIY community. We're still targeting doing some form of limited market release prior to the full release. We haven't yet determined exactly how, what group of people will be part of that limited market release. It's a little bit dependent on our device partners and how people can get access to prescription devices that we don't make. So we're still working that through. But the thing that folks should do right now is go to tidepool.org/loop and sign up for our mailing list, and we will absolutely let people know as there are updates.
And apologies for beeping while we were chatting. And also, as you were talking, this person's asking about testers and contributing. Could you just touch very briefly on the big data project? Because that's another way that people can participate in the work that you guys are doing, right?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So from the very beginning, we thought to ourselves, the type 1 community in particular, but the diabetes community overall, there often is this great desire to ask, how can I help? And what we realized over the years is people were uploading their data to us, and their data was just sitting there, and it was helping them and helping their clinician get insight into the data so that they could take action, but it really wasn't helping anyone else. And we would get asked all the time by researchers, both academic and industry researchers, hey, do you have people in the community who want to contribute data? And so we started asking. I remember you were one of the people we asked early on and said, hey, Carrie, what would you think about this? And it turns out a whole lot of people are very open to donating their data. So back in 2017, we kicked off this project called the Tidepool Big Data Donation Project. And you can read all about it on our website, tidepool.org/bigdata. And the idea of the program is, as a person living with diabetes, you can opt in. This is a totally opt-in thing, but you can check a box and hit a button and say, yes, I would like to donate my anonymized diabetes data to this database. We call it the Tidepool Big Data Donation Program database. And it's a mouthful. And it turns out about 40% of our users do. And so when we launched this, we said, okay, here's the deal. We're gonna give the data away for free to nonprofit researchers, academic researchers who want to help grow and expand the boundaries of knowledge in the world of diabetes. But we are also going to work with big companies like Eli Lilly, like Dexcom, companies that are doing industry research and need access to high quality data sets, and we are going to charge them. And we were totally transparent and continue to be totally transparent about who we're working with and the fact that they are willing to give us money for these high quality anonymized aggregate data sets. The other thing we did is because we're a nonprofit, we said, look, that helps us pay the bills. It helps us pay people like Christopher and the software developers. But by doing that, we also want to share back with the community. So when you opt in to share your data, one of the things you can do is say, I would like you, Tidepool, to share 10% of the proceeds with my favorite diabetes nonprofit. And we have a list of 10 or 12. Children with Diabetes is one of them. And so it's part of the way we're trying to, with this program, share back with the other incredible organizations in the nonprofit community that are doing such good.
I love that. And I also love that it could, someone who might be a little not certain if they want to donate their data, it gives them incentive to go and do that. So it not only does it help these other nonprofits and it helps move research forward and that sort of thing, but also helps them see their data. Once they upload it, then they have access to it. So it kind of scratches both itches, and I think that's very clever. That's right. Diving back into the questions from the users here, or the viewers, we have a question from William who is asking, how is IOB calculated with the loop algorithm, and are there auto corrections?
So Insulin on Board, and again, this is one of the documents that's at tidepool.org/documents, so I will give a very brief summary. IOB is based on what the insulin pump was told to do and what the pump reports back. So I'm going to read into the question, which is probably, how is IOB calculated over time? In other words, what insulin decay model do you use? And the short answer is we use the same insulin decay models that are published for rapid acting insulins like Humalog and Novolog. There's a lot more nitty-gritty detail that I could go into, but I would say go take a look at the algorithm documentation that's at tidepool.org/documents, and that will tell you everything you need to know.
And I'll make sure I keep a link to that underneath this chat when we put it into the archive so that people can access that readily.
Super.
For the next question from Rebecca, another loop question. These are very, very popular sort of questions. What additional restrictions need to be in place to get the DIY loop approved for the FDA as Tidepool Loop? There's a subset question. Are targets and settings just as flexible? And I know you kind of touched on that earlier when you were answering the 80 to 90, but.
Yeah, similar question as before. Our goal is to not put restrictions on that would allow people to use it the way they want to use it. And we know people want custom target ranges. We know people want to be able to enter the ISF and carb ratios that work for them. So as I said before, what we have proposed to the agency is that we maintain that flexibility. I should probably pause for a minute and talk a little about the JABE observational study data and how it supports Tidepool Loop, because it's part of the answer. So as before, we intend to keep the settings flexible. That is what we are proposing to the agency. You can see exactly what we've proposed at tidepool.org/documents. The June 2019 pre-submission meeting in particular has a document that covers that. So our job as a company, if we want to put Tidepool Loop in the App Store, is that we have to file a 510K, which is a fancy regulatory term for the paperwork necessary to demonstrate safety to the FDA. The primary, and there are lots of things that are going to go into that filing. One of the primary sources of safety data is the Loop observational study that was performed by the JABE Center for Health Research. It had over 800 people actively contributing data to it, enrolled. Over 1,000 people were enrolled, and that just wrapped up at the end of March. The JABE Center is now in the process of crunching all that data. We've seen the first cut of it. I'm so excited to share it with the world. We're not quite ready, but we will absolutely positively publish it openly. We have now engaged with another organization called Covance that has experience writing clinical study reports. And so they will be writing an analysis of the raw JABE data. Our mutual friend Adam Brown is also on the Tidepool team, and he's working with Covance and the JABE Center to prepare all that. And that, in addition to a bunch of other stuff, is going to get submitted to the FDA. And the goal is to say, hey, agency, we believe it's safe. Here's all the data that shows that it's safe. Can we please market it and put it in the App Store. That's what they call pre-market clearance.
Wow. And and I'm sure no one has asked it. Oh no, we do have a question about timeline. Do we even want to address timeline? Because that's
Sure. Well, I'll give the same answer I always give. So when
Mhm.
my daughter was diagnosed, and I'm sure you found this too, the diabetes community has always been in this mode of people saying, "Oh, the cure will be here in 5 years. Oh, the closed loop system will be here in
Sorry.
5 years," and we made a decision as Tidepool early on to not contribute to that issue. We try to never overset expectations. Instead, what we
Mhm.
do is we just deliver the facts. Here's where we are. Here's what we're doing. There's all kinds of unknowns. So what I can
Mhm.
tell you is the clinical study wrapped up in March. We are in the process of summarizing all of that data and writing a clinical study report. We are in the process of finalizing all the software development that will turn DIY Loop into Tidepool Loop. And you can
Mhm.
watch us because we do it all out in the open. It's an open source
Mhm.
project, so you can watch what's happening right now. We just submitted our last pre-submission on Friday to the
Oh
agency.
wow.
That will be the last filing that happens before the 510K if everything goes according to plan.
Mhm.
The last big thing we need to do right now is we need to run a human factors study to demonstrate that people can safely do the critical tasks in Loop, like setting their target ranges.
Mhm.
We were all ready to go. We had a protocol for the study drafted in February, March, and then a global pandemic happened. Well, it turns out during a global
God.
pandemic, having people come in person to do a human factors
Mhm.
study isn't really in the cards. So we had to go back with our human factors partner. It's a great organization called Core HF in Philadelphia, and rewrite the protocol to accommodate doing human factors study over video conference, just like
Oh
this.
no kidding.
So that's what we just submitted on Friday.
Wow.
We are very hopeful that the agency will be embracing of that. They've already given out some guidance that they understand that you can't do traditional human factor studies anymore. So we need to have that meeting with the agency. We need to actually conduct the human factor study. We need to wrap up our 510K documentation and submit it to the agency. And then we need to take the final software after the agency approves it and submit it to Apple for approval. There's a lot of unknowns in everything I just said, so I'm not
Right.
going to say here's when that's all going to happen by, but you can follow along at home if you go to tidepool.org/documents and tidepool.org/open. We literally do this all out in the open so that you can see. So the best I can say right now is everything that I just described is measured in months, not years, but specific number of months I can't say
Mhm.
at this point because I don't know.
And again, that's full transparency, and I
Yeah,
appreciate that too. And also not contributing to the 5 more years, everything's going to be
yeah,
great. Like I'm glad that people are starting to chip away at that, because that is a frustrating number to hear, and it almost just becomes rhetoric
yeah.
after a long time. You get kind
I
of
heard
over it. So
I heard someone say 5 years is the minimum credible thing you can say where no one can hold you accountable.
oh
And I think
God,
that's why
really?
it happens. Yeah. So we're
Well,
not
that
going to
is
do
disappointing. So I'm glad you guys are not contributing to a disappointing narrative.
that.
Um, this is a pretty big question from a viewer named Amber. She was saying that our health clinic, their large university system, is fantastic. However, they keep telling us that Tidepool is caught up in legal. So are there any ideas to help with this? She's saying that they use Tidepool Loop and use Apple Health with Dexcom and Omnipod, and everything works together perfectly. So how can they grease the wheels, I think is the crux of the question.
Yeah, this has been frustrating for us too. There are some clinics that are just like, we're in it, they
Hmm.
spend a day on a security review, a day on a legal review, and then it just happens. And then there are other clinics, and we have not cracked the code yet on how to make it go faster.
Hmm.
What I often will say to the clinician, because this is really frustrating to healthcare providers too, is I will say to them, ask your legal department how they're weighing the privacy and legal risk, of which there really isn't any because we do all the things, we're HIPAA compliant, we have all the
Hmm.
legal structures in place, but ask them how they're weighing that perceived risk against the health risk of you as a clinician not being able to see your patient's data. And that often gets them over the hump, giving them
Hmm.
that kind of language to use with their legal department. Because
Hmm.
if you're a clinician and you can't see your patient's data, you are taking risk. I've heard
Right.
all kinds of crazy stories. One clinician had a new diagnosis family that understandably, because there's so much to learn when you're first diagnosed, thought that when blood sugar was low, you give more insulin.
Oh no.
And like it's heartbreaking when you hear
Yeah.
stories like that. But once this clinician was able to see the patient's data, they were like, oh my God, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
Sorry for the confusion. Let's get this sorted out. So being able to empower the doctors, the healthcare providers, the
Mhm.
clinicians to go to their legal department and say, hey, big clinics are using this. We have over 1,000 clinic accounts. And the problem
Mhm.
is some legal departments, some IT departments just feel like, no, 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 we got to make sure every box is checked, which is fine. We will check every box, and we do check
Mhm.
every box, but you got to go faster. Like, people are at risk when you're not going fast enough.
And so I know you've had a short URL for basically every other question that I'd asked. Is there a best practices for helping your clinician get Tidepool integrated with their practice? Is there any kind of resource with that language on your website somewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm pretty sure that at tidepool.org/legal and maybe also tidepool.org/security, we have a white paper that
Hmm.
goes through everything. You can also
Okay.
just encourage your healthcare providers to send us an email at support@tidepool.org, support@tidepool.org, and we will help. We will do everything in our power to get it over the finish line.
So not that I was hoping that that would be some resource that you didn't have, but I am like, again, surprised that you've got that one nailed too. So thank you for having that. So that was /legal. They can find kind of some boilerplate language for that. Oh,
There,
you're thinking it may be there?
and diabetestelemedicine.org is also a short URL, which will lead to the right place on the Tidepool
Got it.
website, diabetestelemedicine.org.
That is awesome. Your head must be very full of short URLs.
I have a cheat sheet right next to
Oh,
me.
do you? Let's see. We have a number of questions and not a whole lot of time. So oh, this is not a question. This is just nice. We have from Katrina. She's just saying, Howard, thank you for what you're doing for our community. You are inspiring. And I'm
Oh,
sure she's
thank
not the
you.
only person thinking that on the webinar. So didn't want to leave that unsaid. Um, a question from Rebecca reads, is anyone considering moving this program over to the Android platform? It sounds much more flexible than the Omnipod 5.
Yes. So we absolutely intend to bring Tidepool Loop to Android. We haven't started working on it yet, simply because the DIY version of Loop existed for iPhone. So getting it up and running for iPhone first,
Mhm.
learning everything that we need to learn in order to get it through the FDA, partner with our device partners, get it out to market, do a successful commercial release. We want to focus and make sure we do that, but we totally understand how important the Android population is. Like our goal as a nonprofit is for Loop to be accessible to everyone, and we're not going to do that unless we port to Android, and we
Mhm.
also have to go international as well. So those are absolutely positively on our roadmap, but again, I can't give you a date, but we will do it.
We have another question. Someone wants your cheat sheet, basically. So they want all your short URLs. I don't know if that's
I'm sure we
available
can
somewhere.
arrange
If you
for
have
that.
a short URL to all your short URLs, it's very meta.
I think
Um,
Tidepool.org is that.
next question is from Peter. Is the ultimate plan for Tidepool Loop to become fully closed loop? And do you have any timeline expectations? Sorry, that's a question that you had already answered in terms of timeline. But are you anticipating going fully closed loop?
I'm going to read into the question a little. I'm assuming that what's being asked is compared to now, where if you want to get the best results, you need to bolus for meals, which most people
Mhm.
call hybrid closed loop. What I definitely can say is we are actively looking at all kinds of interesting ways that we can improve the algorithm. That will certainly be one of them. Right now, again, the goal is get Loop out the door, but doing ongoing algorithm and user experience improvements. Like, software is never done. We're going to keep making it better.
That's awesome. Oh, another question from Sandra. Will Tidepool have to wait for the Insulet Horizon FDA approval to go to market? I'm told that the Horizon pods are different from the Dash pods, so thinking that might make a difference.
So we are still having active conversations with our device partners about the best way to launch Tidepool Loop and the devices that it will be comfortable with. So it'd be a little premature for me to say exactly how that's going to go, because those conversations are happening.
All right. You have successfully gotten through the questions that were sitting in the cache so far. So that's
All
pretty
right.
good. So that means you can take a coffee break real quick. But in terms of like what's coming next for Tidepool, and it seems like you guys have a lot in the pipeline. What does, and I won't say 5 years because that is banned from this conversation, but what
Yeah.
does the like future of Tidepool look like from your hope perspective?
Yeah, I even keep a prop on my desk for this question because I get asked it a
Oh, you
lot.
do?
But, people
Oh, I didn't
people are
know that.
like, well, what's your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year plan? And I always hold up my little crystal ball, which
Nice.
my late sister gave me, so it's very special to me. And I say my crystal ball is really small, and I haven't cleaned it in a while, so I can't see too far into the future. Um, I'm very good at looking 6 months out, and I can tell you even 12 months out, it's going to be all the things that I just said. It's going to be
Hmm.
getting Tidepool Loop out the door, at first in the US for iPhone only, then porting it to Android and going international. It's going to be ongoing algorithm improvements. It's going to be continuing to make our current software, Tidepool Web, Tidepool Mobile, Tidepool Uploader, more capable and more accessible. I think the really big picture for us, and this is where our position as a nonprofit trying to serve the entire diabetes community comes in, is what we really want to do is help contribute to, if not in some ways solve, the access issues. I think one of the things that really breaks my heart is that the kinds of things that people with good insurance who see good
Hmm.
doctors get access to is very different than the kinds of opportunities that other people in our community do. And just to bring two important conversations together, I think one of the tragedies of coronavirus is how hard it's hit the Black population. And I think one of the things we're seeing in all of the incredible momentum from the Black Lives Matter movement is, wait a minute, how come all of this great healthcare that's accessible to rich white people with great insurance isn't accessible to everyone? And I want to make sure we're doing everything in our power to help fix that. So I imagine a world where the best possible diabetes technology is available to everyone, and
Hmm.
where affordability is not an issue, and where access isn't an issue. And for example, I imagine a young child on public assistance insurance gets diagnosed with diabetes. You should be able to go to a clinic, have your new diagnosis onboarding, and imagine saying, here's a prescription benefit card. You can
Hmm.
take this down to Walgreens and CVS, and you're going to go home with 30 or 60 or 90 days of pods and Dexcoms,
Hmm.
and then go get this free app from the App Store that's going to help bring it all together and give you the
Hmm.
best treatment possible. Like, that's the vision I have, that we have, which is how can we make the best possible technology accessible to everyone so that healthcare insurance is a level playing field. That's really where I really want us to go.
I can't think of anything I agree with more. And so, with that in mind, our community is bigger than just the children with
Mhm,
diabetes community and the Tidepool community and the
mhm.
people who are on social media and the people who are blogging. This is an enormous community. And so, how can we, as individuals, as organizations, as a group of people that are working towards the same goal of living well with diabetes, how can we come together to help move a mission like that forward? What is something from your perspective that we can do as a group to support one another? That expression about all the tide rises, all the boats go up. Like, how do we make that happen for
Oh
us as a
man, that
community?
is a huge question,
Yeah,
Carrie. And I
no
wish I had
pressure.
a crisp answer and just say, do this, do this, do this, and we'll
Where's
be
your
done.
short URL for that, man?
Yeah. Tidepool.org/solution. We're going to go work
Yeah.
on that, or slash fix it. So there's so much that can be done. Like
Mhm.
I'm, as we were talking about before this got started, like I am personally getting myself as educated as I can right now on why these disparities and inequities
Mhm.
exist. And so, my first answer is everyone needs to get educated, and everyone needs to understand that we really do have systemic challenges that are making it so that some people get better health care than others. And so get educated first and foremost, understand why that is. I do think there are lots of great organizations, and whether you're supporting organizations in the Black Lives Matter movement, or you're supporting healthcare organizations that are trying to make a difference. And
Mhm.
Tidepool is just one of them. There are tons of other orgs that really could use financial support, moral support, and people speaking out saying this is a problem that we really need to
Mhm.
fix. So get educated, get involved is my short answer.
I love that. And the tidepool.org/solutions or fix it. I mean, that is something
I
that
just
you
made
guys are
that
very
up.
good
That
at.
doesn't actually
I know,
exist.
but now, not, well, it will.
Now we
And
have
so,
to.
but I mean, that's a huge thing. And being able to talk about the things we don't know helps push us forward to solving the problems that exist. And it takes a lot of
Right.
vulnerability to say, I don't understand this, or I don't know how to do this, or I'm afraid to ask these questions. And I'm glad that people are starting to do that and say, I don't have all the answers, but my God, I want to learn. And so,
Yeah, I mean, I'll share an anecdote from this, and I think it really drives home how big a problem this is. So I mentioned the DIY loop observational study. You can actually see the interim readout of those results again at tidepool.org/documents. It was presented at ATTD in Madrid in February, just before all heck broke loose.
mhm,
One of the things, so you can see results, which are amazing, but you can also see demographics. And the
mhm,
reality is the demographics of people who participated in that study are 97% white, and I can't remember if it's 96 or 98 or 97, but high 90s,
mhm,
very high income, and it's clearly people who have access to great health insurance, to CGMs, to insulin pumps.
mhm,
So that's awesome for them. That is not awesome for everyone else. That is not awesome for the single mom who is trying to hold down two jobs and her kid gets
mhm.
diagnosed, and you just want the best care. If you're on public insurance, if you don't have, or if you have a high deductible plan, like these are real problems we got to solve. And for Tidepool, I want to hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we address those issues.
Mhm. And I'm seeing some more questions and comments popping up in the chat, and there's commentary about higher income people are the ones who can afford all of the extra DIY loop equipment and the developer
That's right.
accounts, and that is very true. And a lot of people are struggling to access something as simple as and necessary as their insulin and their syringes. And so
Exactly.
we have to see the community, I think, as a whole, and not just the people who have access to this tier of things, but we want to make sure that we have a full slate of access for everyone. And also for Diane, who's asking if this is going to be recorded and archived, it will. You can go to your appointment. You're not going to miss anything. We're going to replay this, after the fact, so don't be late for your appointment. Um, but we're kind of drawing to a close, and I want to make sure that we have all of our questions answered. But also, I want to make sure that Howard, you have the opportunity to offer anything else that you would want to ask of the community or say to the community. And again, these are not high pressure questions. You don't have to drop profundity from the crystal ball sort of thing. But I mean, you and I both have seen the community grow and change over the last 10 or 15 years, and it's gone in a lot of really great directions, really powerful changes happening. Um, I personally would like to see the storytelling aspect of our community, develop and change and grow. More stories from different people, more people who are telling the stories that you're talking about. What's it like to not be able to access this? What are the things that you struggle with? And so, does Tidepool feature stories from users, or do you guys have
We
that vehicle?
absolutely do. Yeah,
Can you
we
tell us a little bit
absolutely
about that?
do. Yep. So Christopher, who our community
Mhm.
manager, can help organize that, and we have had several blog posts from people in the community who tell their story. Typically we write stories about how Tidepool has impacted their lives, and we've had stories from parents, we've had stories from clinicians, we've had stories from researchers, we've had stories from one blog that sticks in my head was someone who works at a hospital who realized that they weren't doing a good job of looking at the data for people who came in with diabetes. This is a big problem. You go in to get
Sure.
your appendix out, or you go in for something completely unrelated, and they take your pump off and take your CGM off and put you
Hmm.
back on a 1970s sliding scale with the carb exchanges. Like,
Hmm.
hello, it's 2020. We need to figure stuff like that out. So using our technology as a way to help improve care. But yeah, absolutely send a note to Christopher, and he's christopher.snyder@tidepool.org, or just info@tidepool.org. But we love hearing from people, and we do love telling stories of people in our community.
And I'm sure do a lot of those stories that you guys are hearing from either your specific community or the greater diabetes community, do they help drive what you guys put into development next?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So we we actually have a monthly report. We call it the user feedback report. So our support team gathers all of the things that people contact us about, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's feature requests, sometimes it's bugs, sometimes it's new devices to be supported, but we pay very, very, very close attention to that. And that has a dramatic, we even have a rubric by which we calculate a score, which says how impactful this would be to the community. And if it's a high enough score, it can actually get to drop everything. We have to do this right now.
And so, okay, that's another question. I know you only have 10 minutes left, if that on here, but so in terms of being nimble and quick, you guys are very responsive to the community and making sure that your services meet the needs of the broader diabetes community. And so is there a time that you guys heard some feedback from someone that you did do a drop everything and say, this is something that we need to implement immediately? Like, has there been a time in the last couple of years where there was just a, oh my gosh, sort of moment?
So the drop everything ones tend to happen if there are technical glitches that are keeping people from uploading their data. So let me think, is there something where we dropped everything? Oh, here's a good one. It took a while to implement. That's what we actually just launched it. You used to have to be kind of nerdy to be able to export your data from Tidepool. You had to know exactly what to type on the command line in order to export your data to the nerdy file format, which is JSON, or much less turn it into an Excel file. And then we started hearing from people, you know what, I would like an easier way to get my data out. So we actually, we haven't done the full announcement yet, but since I know people will be watching this later, you can now export your data to an Excel file out of Tidepool, which was kind of cool because it happened at just about the same time that CareLink removed that functionality. And so people who really do want access to that data can now do that. So that's a good example of something that was definitely community driven.
Oh, I love that. And it seems like so much of almost everything that you guys are doing is community driven. So it does really come full circle to your.
Well, in part of that is because we are also the community. Like we're now up around 50 employees, and I don't know the exact number, but somewhere around 40 of us have a direct personal connection to someone living with diabetes. So, and we all have friends living with diabetes. So we participate. Like we are a part of this. We feel the same challenges.
And I'm sorry, I got distracted just briefly because my daughter in her Tidepool shirt just walked by and pointed
Bring
and
her
said,
in. Put her on.
Oh, I can't. She'll get way in. But yeah, she pointed to her shirt and wanted to know if we were still on with the t-shirt guys. So
Nice.
but exactly. But we are out of time for the afternoon. I know we had a lot of questions. So thank you to everyone who tuned in and asked your questions. And I'm sure if you have other questions, you can connect with Howard and then also with his team. He's got a short URL for everything, and there's some real beauty to that. So I love that. But Howard, is there anything else that you'd want to add before we sign off for the afternoon?
I just want to say thank you. I'm just such a fan of you and your work and children with diabetes, and you've all done so much for the community, and we're just proud and thankful to be a part of it, and really appreciate everyone's time and coming to this webinar.
Well, the absolute same back to you. Thank you for being so generous with your time and with your perspectives and logging on and answering all the questions from our viewers. So thanks for being part of the discussion today. And thanks everybody for tuning in. We will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, Howard.
Thanks, Gary. See ya.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
And it hasn't ended yet because it would be great if I would just end the webinar, and I'll do that now. Bye.